Alright, today's video is about civil society, which is a government term you've probably never heard before, but one that's very important for AP Comparative Government. Civil society can be defined as everything that is not the state and not the individual. So, for example, in comparative government, we study states. We look at institutions of government. We look at the legislature, how it's structured. We look, do they have an independently elected executive, like a president? We look at their legal system, their judicial system, see how independent it is. And then we often look at citizens and their relationship with the state. So how free is the average person? Do they have a right to vote? Do they have access to an attorney if they're ever put on trial? That's all very important, but there's another component, which is not the state and not the individual. It's everything else in the middle. So, for example, as I have defined here, all voluntary private associations that form in free societies. Obviously, the freer the society, the more voluntary associations will form, which could give you a good indication of another way of trying to figure out how free a society is. First one that should jump in your mind would be religion. Obviously, religion in most instances is not an individual, it's obviously a group, and any religion that has a large group is going to have some sort of organization. Many of them provide charitable services for their members as well as non-members. They do a lot of community outreach, that kind of thing. So they play an active role in society. Now the question is, what is their relationship to the state? So in most places, especially liberal democracies we've studied, religions are free to form and provide services. But there's lots of other groups that provide services in the community that are they're not actually religious institutions. So here I've got a screenshot of one of the United Nations website page on civil society groups. The term they use at the UN is a non-governmental organization. So again, any kind of organization that is not owned, operated, controlled, managed, or otherwise run by the government. They have lists of literally thousands of NGOs around the world. This is just the beginning of the list, and it goes on and on for pages. I picked one at random here. It's Action Canada. So this is a non-governmental organization or some sort of independent voluntary group. And if you look, they list as their issues economic and social issues such as children, human rights, international law, migration, and population. So things they're concerned about, they lobby the government. They advocate for rights, for human rights and advocacy. I'm sure they lobby different governments in particular. I'm sure they spend a lot of time lobbying for enhanced human rights for Canadians. Some other NGOs you've probably heard of, like this one. Obviously, I think most people have heard of the Red Cross. Obviously, it's a very, very large international institution designed to help people in need, especially immediately after natural disasters like hurricanes and forest fires. And I know after the September 11th attacks, there was a Red Cross set up operations in New York City to help some of the people whose lives were so devastated by that terrorist attack. So any group, and they can exist between countries, not just in a country, that is involved in providing services or otherwise working with people, again, that's not directly run by the government. Now, that does not mean that NGOs or groups in voluntary groups in a free society are not going to have occasional conflicts with the state. So I have a couple slides here mentioning possible conflicts. For example, many U.S. cities, the local city government has passed ordinances or laws prohibiting the feeding of homeless people in an attempt not to encourage homeless people to come to the city. And many charitable groups have a mission to help the homeless and other poor people in cities. It may be a religious group that feels that it's their mission to help people. And so now there's a conflict between doing what they believe their mission is and what the state, in this instance, the local government, wants them to do or bans for them. Then sometimes there's conflicts with the civil society groups and individuals. So for example, this is commonly an occurrence in the United States. Sometimes you have a group that forms, and within their First Amendment right of free association, they form and they decide they're going to have rules as to who's allowed into their group. They have a right to freely associate with whoever they want. Here's the problem. Sometimes then those groups are noted as groups that other people want to join but are being banned from. So, for example, there's been more than a few instances where there's a private golf course or golf club that bans women members, and women want to join. And in a free society, people should not be discriminated against. In addition, what about black people who want to join the golf club? Maybe they're prohibited. So these are examples of the conflict of rights between a group's right to form and set its own rules and policies and state laws that usually prohibit discrimination based on race or sex or some other factor like that. Often then the government has to get involved through the court system in determining who has the right, whose right is paramount in this instance, whose right is the right, protection against discrimination more important than the right of free association. And this has happened on more than one occasion. The last area here is one simply of citizens interacting with other citizens. It seems kind of almost childish if you think that civil society means we're being civil to each other. How polite or friendly are we to each other? But to some extent, that is actually part of it. To what extent do human beings interact and citizens in society interact peacefully, coexisting and settling their own differences without needing government to step in and solve the problems for them? In many free societies, you have a whole area of law called tort law, where if somebody commits a wrongful act against you, you can sue them for damages, for some sort of financial compensation. So if they hit you with a car and they don't pay the insurance bill, you can sue them for damages. If they somehow damage your property, you can sue them for damages, that kind of thing. There's a whole area of people being injured by products. For example, people falling off ladders and they sue the ladder company for making what they believe is a defective ladder. Sometimes it's things such as swimming hazards, people worried about drowning and being warned about not having lifeguards on duty. So in many societies, you have rules and policies that are set up like warning labels on products and warning labels on a lot of things. They're not actually created by the government. Those warning labels are not actually created by the state. They're created by citizens suing each other and other citizens then being concerned about being sued in the future and putting warning labels up on products to protect themselves. The same reason you might have a sign out front that says, beware of dog or something like that on the property. So the question is, how much of that exists? The more warning labels like this that exist in a society is also an indication of more freedom, because these are not imposed by the government. The government doesn't put warning labels on things. The government simply fines you if you don't obey the rules or some other punishment. So to recap, civil society is, again, the interaction of citizens in this society with each other in groups, and how those groups interact with both the state above it and, in a sense, the citizens below, and how, frankly, the groups interact with each other, and how they all work together in harmony. And these are very important. This is, in a sense, part of the civic culture, how the people interact with each other. And in many ways, it's very important, in fact, sometimes more important than the actual structure of the government, for understanding how a country works.